Okay, so this is the final video of day 4 for Algebra 2's Unit 3. And in it, we're just going to talk a little bit about transformations relative to cube roots and cubic functions. Um, Not a whole lot of difference from what we've seen. We can already surmise, A in both cases is probably our vertical stretch or shrink, right? And when A is greater than 1, that means it is stretch. When A is, not going to use a capital A, when A is less than 1, but greater than 0, so it's like a fraction or a decimal in between 0 and 1, we say that's vertical shrink instead, right? And of course, if A is negative, so if A is less than 0, a negative, right, we know we have a reflection across X. Now, an important thing to remember will be this. Okay, this b value here, because of the nature of cube roots and cubes themselves, right? We talked about previously when we talked about even and odd functions, um, that the cube root of x, of negative x, we'll say, is exactly the same thing as the cube root of the negative cube root of positive x. These two right here are exactly the same thing. That's because cube and cube root functions in their parent form, uh, in their most base form, are odd functions. Okay, and again, that just means that negative f of x and f of negative x are equal. And if that's the case, right, they're odd. So what does that mean for us in terms of transformations? Well, that basically just means that you can factor out. So let's say if there's a negative here, if there's a negative here for b, you can factor this out and it goes into association with whether or not we're being reflected. Okay, you'll see what I mean here in a second when I get our geometry up on this graph here in a minute on these links right here down below. Okay, so it's kind of difficult to put that into words, but it'll make perfect sense once you see the visual. Okay, we can already surmise what these C's do. These here in orange are obviously our horizontal shift. Okay, and again, it runs that same way, that counterintuitive way, wherein, if we have minus C, we're going to the right. If we have plus C, we're going to the left, right? And last little tidbit here, we can already guess that that's going to be our vertical uh, shift or our vertical translation. Okay, so plus D is up, minus D is down. So now let's take a look at those visuals that I'm talking about. So this first one is associated with the cube root function. Okay, let me make some adjustments on here first to make it a little more viewer friendly. Okay, so here we have got uh, a cube root function, however horrifying it may be. So we see that A is negative, right? And here, let's do this. Let's go ahead and enter in the parent function. So CVRTX. Okay, so here's the parent function, right? And relative to the parent function, we see here in orange that we've been shifted to the right and shifted down, right? But this is a plus 4, right? So why have we been shifted to the right? Well, the reason we've been shifted to the right is because of this negative here, okay? And this goes back to what I was telling you earlier. This negative here, right? If that b is negative next to the x, we can factor out a negative from this whole expression underneath the radical, okay? So if I go ahead and do that, and I factor out the negative, so that negative comes out, makes this -2 a +2 now, right? Changes the signs of what's inside. Now it makes perfect sense. Okay, so that goes back to what we said previously. This is an odd function, right? It's an odd function. So if I factor out a -1 from -x and +4 to make it +x and -4, and change this -2 to a +2 here, right? That gives me the exact same function 2 times. Okay, you see they completely overlap. And we see we have the vertex right here at 4 by negative 3 because we went 4 to the right, down 3. Okay, so let's look at another example, and we're going to see something similar happen here with our cube function. Okay, and again, let me make the adjustments to make it a little more user-friendly here on your screen. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's put these out of the way first. Let's go ahead and put the parent function, so x to the third power, right? So here's where x to the third power is. This point right here is where it's gonna move, given what we've got here. And here we see it again. So we see plus 3, and yet we shifted to the right by 3. And we know that that's not right. But again, we see we have a negative b here. So that means we can factor out this negative b out to here and change the sign of what's inside the parentheses, the actual cubed expression. And we see that it makes sense now. We did shift to the right by 3. We did shift up by 5. We have vertical stretch by 2, and we are being reflected. Okay? So nothing really new other than these functions are odd. So having negatives associated directly with the expression x, I'm not going to say it doesn't really change anything, but we can easily factor that in because they're odd functions. Okay, so that does it for this video. You know where to find me if you have any questions. Goodbye.